Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. I? Me? My name is Zoe. It's spelled Z-O or Z to the O. For those of you outside of the US, thank you for joining us for the 139th episode of Backlook Cinema, the podcast, where we take a look back at the movies of yesteryear from the latter half of the 1900s. If you like what you're about to hear, then tell your family, tell your friends, and tell that man whose name is the killing word about our little show. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to talk about a movie that I've loved for a long time. And the thing about this movie is that I wanted to talk about it now because of the recent new adaptations of this movie that have come out. And I have loved these new adaptations. But I go back to this earlier adaptation because I really enjoy it. And the thing about this particular interpretation of this literary masterpiece is that it really is hard to translate. So the work that I'm talking about is Dune, and Dune is difficult to translate to really any other media because of the particular way that it's written, because of just how dense the subject matter is. And you know, some people have been trying to take a shot at this movie for years, trying to take a shot at making this movie. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about some of how this movie came together. At least I'm just going to allude to it when I get to the trivia section. But before we get there, let's talk about this movie. Let's talk about this movie called Dune. In the year 10,191, the emperor of the known universe is in a bind. One of his most loyal great houses, the House Atreides, has developed a new fighting technique, and the popularity of the head of this house, Duke Leto Atreides, is growing among the other great houses. He's also under pressure. The emperor, that is under pressure by the Spacing Guild to eliminate the House Atreides. To that end, His Majesty has devised a scheme to offer the most valuable planet in the universe, Arrakis, to his loyal Duke Leto, and then betray Leto using Leto's dreaded enemies, the House Harkonnen. But there is one thing that somewhat eludes the Emperor and threatens to overturn his schemes within schemes: the heir to Duke Leto, a young man named Paul. So this movie was released December 14th, 1984, produced by Universal Pictures. It grossed over $30 million in the US, and in Canada, the same. It grossed $30 million in the US and Canada, and $40 million was the budget. Now, if you're thinking about this, you realize that if they produced the movie for $40 million and they only grossed $30 million in the US and Canada, then you would say this movie is a flop, and you'd be correct. And if you translate that to today's dollars, that would mean that the budget for this movie was $120 million, and the returns, the box office receipts, was $90 million, was well below what people expected. What their producers and the filmmakers expected that this film would make, because they definitely went for it. They really wanted this to be a huge epic film. You can tell that in its production design, it's the actors they chose, the music they use, it's grandiose in its presentation, but somehow it fell short of what they were hoping for. Dune was starring Cal MacLachlan. He plays Paul Atreides, Paul Moad'Dib, the Kwisatz Haderach. He's been in Blue Velvet, The Great Little Ones, The Flintstones of 1994, and lately you can find him in the Fallout series. Francesca Annis, she played Lady Jessica. You may have seen her in Kroll, The Libertine, and Hamlet from 2024. Oh, as an aside, let me point out that this movie has a gigantic cast. I'm not going to go over everybody in the cast, but I'll probably go over most of them. I'm not going to do a deep dive into the actors and all of their projects because they're very well known, very prominent figures, and they have most of them have a prominent profiles. But I'm just going to kind of glance over them because the cast, as I said, is so huge. So up next we have Jürgen Prochnow. I hope I said that right. He plays Duke Leto Atreides. You may have seen him in Das Boot, The English Patient, and Judge Dredd from 1995. And we covered it in our episode 55. And yes, I do love this version of Judge Dredd. I know that there are problems with it. And I know a lot of the hardcore Judge Dredd fans hate it, but I actually enjoy it. Up next is Kenneth Macmillan. He played Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, and he absolutely went for it in his role. You may have seen him in Cat's Eye, Runaway Train, or Amadeus. Everett McGill played Stilgar. You may have seen him in The Straight Story, Heartbreak Ridge, or Quest for Fire. Brad Dourif played Mentat Piter de Vries, or it might be De Vries. It doesn't matter. They don't say his last name that much. But what is interesting is that he made some very interesting acting choices. You may have seen him in The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, or Child's Play. I think most people might remember him from that. Or you might have seen him in Fatal Beauty. Jose Ferrer played the Padishah Emperor Shaddam Corino IV. You may have seen him in The Caine Mutiny or Moulin Rouge from 1952. Patrick Stewart, I know that guy. He played Bernie Halleck, and you may have seen him in what some consider the greatest superhero movie of all time, Logan, or in this some space adventure called Star Trek Generations. I wonder whatever happened to that guy. Up next is Sting. He played Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen. He's been in Camelot, first installment. That's the name of the show or movie or whatever it is. Camelot first installment. Really, Sting hasn't really been in a lot of cinema playing a different character. Usually when he's in a movie or TV show, he's playing himself or an exaggerated version of himself. So as far as I can tell, this is the only role that he played in a movie where he's playing a different character. I also remember one time when Cats was real big when I was growing up, and the show Cats was touring, I guess, around the country. And one of the big things that they got people to come to the theater to watch Cats was that Sting was in the cast, and they were really happy that Sting had joined the Broadway musical Cats. And that's interesting. That's I guess you could say that's another time he played a different character. Paul L. Smith played the Beast Rabin Harkonnen. You may have seen him in Maverick from 1994 and Popeye from 1980. What's interesting about this is that I recently did a rewatch of Popeye, and I didn't like it. But I will say that Paul L. Smith really fit the role of Brutus or Bruto or Pluto, however you want to call him, the big guy that's Popeye's nemesis. Silvana Mangana played the Reverend Mother Ramallo. You can find her in Conversation Piece and This Angry Age. Cian Phillips, or it might be Sean, I'm not exactly sure. It's got a letter with a little thing on top of it. I am messing up the pronunciation of this name, and I'm sorry. It's not on purpose. Anyways, she plays Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Moham. You may have seen her in Clash of the Titans from 1981 or Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Richard Jordan plays Duncan Idaho. You may have seen him in The Hunt for Red October that we covered in a very early episode 2, or you may have seen him in Logan's Run. Freddie Jones plays Mentat Thufir Hawat. You may have seen him in The Count of Monte Cristo from 2002 or The Elephant Man. Virginia Madsen plays Princess Irulan Corino. You may have seen her in Sideways or Candyman. I actually did a rewatch of Candyman. Actually, I thought it was a rewatch, and later on figured out it wasn't a rewatch. It was the first time I've ever seen Candyman, and I did that with John from Movie Lovers Unite. It was a fascinating look at that movie, but I can't figure out, like, if you said that this woman was in Candyman and then this same woman was in this movie, Dune, I would not be able to pick her out. But yeah, I did do a watch of Candyman, and it was fun. And so if you can find Movie Lovers Unite on YouTube and check out that episode where we talk about Candyman. Leonardo Cimino played the Baron's Doctor. You might be able to find him in The Monster Squad or Hudson Hawk. And finally, I had to put this credit in, like, when I talk about the people who acted in this movie. So we got to go to Linda Hunt. She played Shout Out Mapes, and you can find her in The Year of Living Dangerously and Silverado. So this movie was directed by David Lynch. You can also find that he's done not a whole bunch of movies, but the movies that he's done are profound. And he's also responsible for a lot of well-regarded TV shows. So among his movies, we have Lost Highway, Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, The Elephant Man, Eraserhead, Lost Highway, and Mulholland Drive, which he somehow directed twice, because there is a TV movie that he directed of the same name, Mulholland Drive. And then he made a theatrical movie based on the same material. So that's fascinating. This movie was written by Frank Herbert and David Lynch. So Herbert obviously wrote the original novel and the entire series of books based on Dune. And Lynch basically writes his own movies. He doesn't direct a movie that he hasn't written. He hasn't written a story for, or he hasn't written a screenplay for. He's very passionate about filmmaking. And so, like, he gets an idea, he has a passion for doing something, and he'll write a story, and then he'll want to direct his own stories. I couldn't find anywhere where he's written a movie for somebody else or that he's directed somebody else's story. He's very much passionate about bringing his stories to life in cinema. Up next, we have music by Toto, Brian Eno, and uncredited Marty Patch. I'm sorry. I can't get it. It's P-A-I-C-H. Page. It might be a diphthong. I should have gone to YouTube and found the pronunciation of this last name. Sorry, Marty Patch. Anyway, Toto's only film composition. So you won't find any more movies that are composed or their music is composed by the rock band Toto, but a lot of their hits are featured in other movies. So for example, in Moonfall or Hired Gun or Horrible Bosses 2, you will find that their song Africa is used. In the movie Chips or Click or Mr. Wrong, you have Hold the Line. And in MacGruber or Mistress America, you can find that they use their song Rosanna. And then there are dozens and dozens of TV shows and other movies where their songs are used. And not just these songs, but these are the most common: Africa, Hold the Line, and Rosanna. Brian Eno, he's done movies such as Tomorrow's Freedom, Ithaca, We Are as Gods, and Rams. I'm not familiar with any of these movies, but he has been very busy. He has a lot of credits. And then finally, Marty Peach. I don't know how to say it. He's also done music for Changes, The Swinger, the man called Flintstone. And when I say music, I mean he composed for these movies. And he's also done the song It's a Long Road for the movie First Blood. And so that's it for the opening credits. And as for the announcements, if all goes to plan, I'll be on a YouTube as a live guest I'll be on a YouTube live as a guest. I'll be making a guest appearance on Movie Lovers Unite with John D. Gregorio to talk about Days of Thunder at 9 p.m. EST. I have not seen the Days of Thunder. I remember when the movie came out, there was a lot of hype around it. It's a race car movie starring Tom Cruise, and I was always curious about it, but I never got around to seeing it. So I get to see it now. So that's going to be interesting. So now that we've done the announcements and we have, what else did we do? We talked about the opening credits. Let's get into our favorite parts. So I have several favorite parts. Usually I just do 5 favorite parts. But I'm going to do more than 5, I think, this time. So let's get into it. Like I said, the story of Dune is extraordinarily dense, and just a basic overview. If you're familiar with the Dune movies that have just come out, that were directed by Denis Villeneuve, or if you're familiar with this version, or there was also, I think, a 1995 TV miniseries version, or maybe you've read the original novel. It was broad strokes. It's basically an intergalactic empire. There are a bunch of major houses that are controlled by the emperor, and there's one house that's in control of the most valuable planet in the universe, and that planet is Arrakis. It's also known as Dune to the indigenous population. The planet is valuable because it has the only material that allows for faster than light speed travel. So that allows the emperor to control and, in some cases, expand his empire. So there are no aliens in this universe, I should say, and in this storytelling. It's just the humans. And the humans some of the humans have been mutated by taking so much spice. And so they rely on it to basically run their civilization. It's both oil and a drug. So it's an all-in-one. Imagine if cocaine could run your car, and then you get how important spice is. Well, maybe it's not I guess it is as hard as cocaine. If we consider that cocaine is legal, then if cocaine can run your car, then you have something that's extraordinarily valuable, and it can only be found on this planet. So this planet isn't administered by it's not run by the emperor himself. He passes off the responsibility of running this planet to some of his houses. So the house that had control is the House Harkonnen. They're really a bunch of not nice people. They're not particularly well groomed or well mannered for that matter. They're kind of rude. And it has come to pass that the emperor is kind of nervous about one of his other great houses, the Atreides house. So he needs to get rid of him. So what does he do? He decides to trade off the responsibility of Dune. So he removes House Harkonnen and he places House Atreides. And House Atreides thinks this is great honor, a great responsibility. It was like, yeah, we got control of the most powerful planet and we're going to do a lot of good with this. But unbeknownst to them, the reason that they are placed on Dune by the Emperor, so he wants to return with the Harkonnens, the House Harkonnens, and they're basically supposed to wipe out the entire house of House Atreides, kill all the family members and all the servants and anybody that's loyal to the Atreides. He wants to wipe them out completely on Dune. And they don't really say this out loud, but I suspect that because the Atreides have their own planet. They have their own home planet. So I suspect that on their own turf, the Atreides are entirely too powerful. So what the Emperor's plan is to remove them from their home planet where they're safe, put them on Dune where they're vulnerable, and then attack them at their weakest. Because you're like, they're moving their entire household and their staff and everything from their home planet to Dune. So you got to imagine there's a lot of confusion. Plus, like, they're not friendly with the Harkonnens. They regard the Harkonnens as their arch enemy. So their Harkonnens leave, but they don't leave it clean. Like, if you're asked to leave a territory for your enemies, you're not going to leave it in pristine conditions. You're going to break some stuff and you're going to leave some booby traps. So removing the booby traps and the spies and the the assassins that have been left behind, they have to basically kind of clean house. And in this house cleaning that the Atreides are forced to do, that's when they're most vulnerable, and that's when the Harkonnens attack. The Harkonnens are backed by the Emperor. The Emperor actually sends his own troops disguised as Harkonnens in order to rid the planet of the Atreides. But it doesn't go exactly as planned. Some of the Atreides family members, namely Paul and his mother, they actually escape. They go into hiding among the indigenous population called the Fremen. And they devise a plan and a plot to retake the planet Dune from not only the Harkonnens, but from the Emperor himself. They gain control of the planet, and the plan is to overturn the Emperor, regain control of the planet, and control the universe that way. So those are the broad strokes, and and I hope that I explained it in such a way that people can understand. And then there's a lot of like little details, like Paul is said to be a messiah, and the Fremen, the indigenous population, accepts him as the messiah, and so on and so forth. And there are a lot of rituals, and there are a lot of traditions there's a lot of story building that's kind of baked into this movie theme. What's interesting about the world building, what's interesting about the world building is that they repeat a lot of stuff in this movie. There's a lot of exposition, and they repeat a lot of their exposition like over and over again, because I suspect the studio was very worried about people getting this movie. One of the things they did was that they had like a monologue at the beginning of the movie that kind of explains the story, that sets the audience up for the story they're about to watch, which is not bad, in my opinion, because there are a lot of, especially when you're dealing with sci-fi movies, that have like some kind of exposition in the beginning. Like Star Wars is famous for it. They have the crawl, they don't, what is there? A credit call, a monologue crawl, at the beginning of every Star Wars movie. I'm trying to think of what it might be called, but I can't think of a proper name for it. But you got the words that go up the screen that audiences are forced to read to find out what Star Wars is all about, to the basic setup for that particular movie that they're about to watch. So I don't think that the exposition at the beginning is in and of itself bad, but it continues throughout the entire movie, so much so that this is one of the rare movies that you'll watch where you can see what the characters are thinking. It's like that they speak out loud, and also you can hear their thoughts. It's not that they're talking to each other with telepathy, which is something that you see in some movies. Now, this is just them thinking about stuff. And that's because there are a lot of situations where they have to act opposite of what they're thinking. And the studio wants to make that clear. So they're acting one way, like they're talking to somebody and they might be acting happy. And then their inner thoughts are like, I want to kill this dude, but they can't show that in expression on their faces. So in a one way, I can kind of understand it. It makes it for a very interesting viewer that you can hear what their characters are thinking. But I don't know, this is something that might put some people off, because some people might say, well, why don't they just act it out on their faces instead of doing this inner monologue type of deal? I'm not exactly sure how other people feel about their inner thoughts being spoken out loud, but it kind of made this a very different movie to watch. So there's like I said, a lot of world building going on. So one of my favorite things I actually did at the beginning of the show was I did the fear monologue, where it's kind of a litany. I must not fear. Fear is a mind killer. I kind of like that. I like how that kind of sets up the world building. And that's one of the things that some of the characters cite when they're trying to build up their courage. The other, so one of my favorite parts, I'm getting to it, is there is a time when Paul must be tested. Paul is considered to be a very special human being. So there's a organization, a sisterhood, a group of militant nuns, and nuns/witches that have been engaged in this a breeding program for thousands of years to try to breed a very special human being. Paul's mother, Lady Jessica, has decided that she's going to bring about this human being. She wasn't supposed to, but she decided that instead of having all girls that she was commanded, she had a son, because not only because her husband wanted a son, but because she actually was vain enough to think that she could give birth to this Superman. And these space nuns have special powers that people in general don't have, especially not men. So because she had this child, they have to test him to see if he could be trained in their ways. He has some of their power, but now they're just trying to decide whether he should be allowed to exist, basically. So he has to be tested. So one of the leaders of this order of militant nuns, they call themselves the Bene Gesserit. And Paul's mother is also a member of this organization, but she's not high ranking. So she's ordered to bring her son, Paul, to one of the Bene Gesserit hierarchy. And this woman tests Paul to see if he's worthy of these powers that he might have and worthy to survive. So she brings this box, and he's supposed to put his hand in the box, and then the test is that he has to leave his hand in the box and experience unimaginable pain. And if he removes his hand because of the pain, then the woman will kill him. She has a poison tip needle pointed at his neck. She's basically got him by his neck. She's grasping his neck by her hands, and at the tip of one of her fingers is a poison tip needle. She is fast enough to kill him at any moment, and he's on his knees. He's got his hand in the box. He can't really move. If he tries to move, he's going to die. So he's kind of in a bind. So she starts to tell him the pain that he's going to feel, and he starts to feel it. So the first is the itch. And so he starts feeling, his hands start feeling itchy, and it gets more and more intense until we would consider it unbearable. And you can see the discomfort growing on his face. And what I like about this movie is that it kind of gives you a visualization of what his hand is going through. So first is the itch, and then it's heat, and then it's burning, and then it's burning to the point where his skin is peeling off, and he's screaming, but he's keeping his hand in the box. And I think that the woman that's testing him gets some sense of what he's feeling, because apparently at least the way she's acting it out, she's experiencing it to some degree. And so finally she calls it off. It's almost like she calls it off because she can't take the pain anymore. And then she tells him that he can remove his hand from the box, and then when he takes his hand out the box, it's perfectly fine. It's just a a way of making him experiencing pain without actually causing harm. And she says, no man has ever withstood the box for as long as he had withstood it. So I like that part. And one of the things that I think about when I see that scene is that I would have pulled my hand out at the itch just because there are certain sensations that I can't stand. It's like when my hand started itching, I would have pulled my hand out the box to scratch it, and I would have died. She had me at the itch. That's one of my favorite parts. Another one of my favorite parts, it's going to require some exposition, is that when the Atreides take over Arrakis, they're doing inspection, they're taking over the planet and the production of the spice, and they're going over, all of the things that they have to do. And so one of the things they have to do is that they have to do an inspection of the spice collecting machines. And so they fly out into the desert and they see one of these sand crawlers and, collecting the spice from the sand, and they get worm sign. I didn't mention this, but on Arrakis, there's these giant worms, and they're as big as buildings. They're as long as about several football fields. They're gigantic worms. That's the main feature of this planet, besides the spice, are these giant worms. And whenever they feel a sensation in the sand, they go out and attack it. In the first expedition, it's because they're very territorial. But later on, in the movie, you learn that they have the sandworms have a relationship with the spice. I think that I don't know if they actually explain it in the film or in this film, but the sandworms actually produce the spice. It has something to do with the worms. So this crawler is like a size of a small house. It's collecting sand, and there are what they call worm signs. So basically they see a worm coming towards the sand crawler, but there's enough time for flying machines to come down and pick up the sand crawler off of the ground and fly it away before it's attacked by sandworms. Sandworms always attack these crawlers. They always attack things that are crawling along the ground. So they always have this flying machine flying around, dropping off and picking up sand crawlers when the worms come up or when the worms are sighted. So I'm going to say it's the famous scene in the movie. At least it's one of my favorite scenes, when the Duke is in one of the, he's in they call it an ornithopter in the book, but they don't really try to create an ornithopter in a movie. In the movie, it just looks like a flying box, and it's very disappointing. And I don't know what these things look like in the TV show, but in the new movies, they basically look like dragonflies, and it's a very good representation of what an ornithopter would look like. And if you're not sure what an ornithopter is what people used to think an airplane had to be. So an ornithopter is a flying machine that has wings that flap like a bird. Now, even in the newer movies, these wings don't work like a bird's wing does, unless you think of a hummingbird. So yeah, they flap like a hummingbird's wings, but they don't really flap like you kind of normally think of a bird's wings flapping. And it's kind of hard to visualize a man-made machine that flaps like a bird that at the same time looks cool, right? It's kind of hard to imagine that. So in this movie, they didn't even try. They just fly in these flying boxes, and I don't even think they identify these boxes as an ornithopter. So the Duke is flying around with his staff and his son being given this tour. They see a worm coming toward the sandcrawler. They tell the sandcrawler, to call for your flying machine to pick you up. For some reason, the flying machine doesn't show up. The flying machine is missing and is not coming down to the rescue. And suddenly they don't have enough time for anybody to lift up the sandcrawler with the spice. So the Duke decides he's going to land his flying box and he's going to pick up the staff off of that sandcrawler before the worm comes and devours it. So he commands the flying craft to land near the sandcrawler. People get out the sandcrawler and they start running. And it's like on his way there, this is the part that I love. He's like, everybody get out of there, get out of the sandcrawler station. Everybody prepare to be picked up. I'm going to come and pick you up in my little box. And somebody shouts, but what about the spice, sir? And he says, damn the spice. And that's my favorite part. That damn the spice, because the actor, his name that I mentioned earlier, Jürgen Prochnow, he has an accent. I'm not exactly sure what accent that is. I didn't look him up, and perhaps I should have. But the accent that he has is very profound. So when he shouts, damn the spice, that kind of adds to the enjoyment of him, my enjoyment of him saying that line. So they did as they were commanded. They damned the spice. They ran out to the flying box. They got in the flying box. The flying box took off, and the giant worm devoured the sandcrawler thing. And that was all fascinating. That's a great part. Another one of my favorite parts is the time Jessica used the voice, Lady Jessica. So here's the thing. At the time that the Atreides is being attacked by the Harkonnens and backed secretly by the Emperor's shock troopers, their houses are, their shields are lowered and they're under fire by air, by all of these troopers coming into their buildings and whatnot. It was like they're stressed out. They're being wiped out, like just room to room, just being wiped out. So Jessica is able to get her son, and they're able to. They were captured too. The entire house was captured. Paul was captured. His mom was captured. Their father was captured separately, and was put in a bad way. So everybody's in a bad way. So what they decided that what they would do is that they would take Jessica and Paul and leave them in the desert for the worms to get them, or for them to be killed by the natives. And the main reason they do this is because they don't want to be held directly responsible for murdering the leaders of the house. They want it to be done in surreptitiously, because you got other great houses, and they wouldn't look favorably upon one house murdering the leaders of the other house. So they're trying to do it as surreptitiously as they can. So they decided that the Paul and his mother being left out in the desert, that's good enough that's good enough for plausible deniability. It's like, what? We don't know where these people are. We took over their place. We killed everybody, and they were nowhere to be found. Maybe they're out in the deep desert somewhere. So Paul and his mother are being taken by Harkonnen soldiers out into the deep deserts in one of these flying boxes. And Jessica is gagged because, as I mentioned earlier, she's a member of this militant nun order called the Bene Gesserit. So the Bene Gesserit has this ability to make you do what they tell you to do with this technique called the voice. So she's gagged and she can't speak. And it's one of those gags where it's not just some cloth over her mouth. They got something that that sticks in her mouth, like it's kind of like a pacifier that they put in her mouth and tie it like a gag. So anyways, I think I over-explained that. I didn't need to say all of that. So anyways, they don't tie Paul up. Well, they tie Paul up, but they don't gag him because he's a dude, and dudes don't have the voice, at least as far as they know. So they're flying, and Paul tries to use the voice. One of the guys, he decides he wants to get all frisky with Jessica, and Paul, trying to use the voice, says, "Take your hands off my mother." But it's not quite right. He can't get the inflection right. So they hit him with one of their guns, and then he kind of adjusts his mouth and he says it again. He says, ungag my mother, right? And this time he said he does the voice perfectly. And the dude ungags his mother, and then she does it. She uses the voice, and she says, both of you don't have to fight over me. Because remember, the dude he wants to get frisky with Jessica, and she tells him, both of you don't have to fight over me. And so the dude takes out his knife and stabs the other dude, the pilot, the dude that's still flying, the flying box. And and then what did Jessica tell him to do? I think at that point Paul goes into action, and he kicks the dude, or they tell him to cut their bonds or something like that. Anyway, they basically got rid of the dude that they had control over, and they were able to land the ornithopter in the desert, and they escaped. But I really love that part where Jessica uses the voice, and I think particularly because she doesn't say something like untie me, or she doesn't say kill the other dude. She says, you don't both have to fight over me. It's almost like the suggestion of killing somebody else over her was enough for the dude to kill the co-pilot. So I really like that part. One of the most interesting parts of this movie was how they characterized or how they decided to display what's called the weirding way. So it has an interesting history in an adaptation of Dune. The weirding way is one of the reasons that this movie is kind of hard to adapt. So in the latest movie that just came out, they kind of ignored it entirely. And I believe that one of the reasons they ignored the weirding way is because, well, let's go back to Frank Herbert. Frank Herbert did not want to characterize Paul Atreides as the Messiah or the Savior. Now, throughout the entire book, in the original book, that is how Paul is characterized. He's characterized as a Messiah that's going to come and save the Fremen people from their circumstances. They don't really undo what was kind of set up in the book. And Frank Herbert would say, no, that's not what I was doing at all. And you can kind of see it in the second book where he kind of flips the narrative where everything kind of goes bad for the Empire in the second book. But that's not the way it's set up in the first book. So Denis Villeneuve, what he did in the newer Dune movies, that one of the things he did is that he did not really have the weirding way in the movie. And the weirding way is a way of fighting that the Atreides developed. It is a special kind of dominating sort of martial arts / technological advancement in fighting techniques. So in the Dune miniseries, they kind of present this as people moving really fast, like they're moving like the Flash. That's kind of how they show it in the miniseries. In this movie, the weirding way is a combination of a fighting technique and people using these modules. They're kind of like they're these boxes with barrels that they speak into. Well, they're basically deadly speaker boxes. Let's put it that way, or deadly not a speaker boxes, but like a very deadly bullhorn, basically. And they call these the weirding modules. So they have these weirding modules, and it allows you to yell into it and destroy things. Or you could burst somebody's organs, or you can set stuff on fire. There are so many things that this weirding module can do if you can speak to it the right way. And it's also a combination with close quarters fighting or a special type of martial arts. So you're both striking with your fists, or you're diving out of the way, and you're also screaming into this box and hurting people or destroying machines or things of that nature. And that's how it's not actually described in the book. They say that there's the weirding way and is a special way of fighting, but they don't actually describe what people are doing when they are using the weirding way in a fight. So this is how it's displayed in the David Lynch movie. And I do like how it's used. I think that it's this movie's version of the lightsaber, I guess. And the reason I say it's tied to the lightsaber narrative is because this is something that Paul brings to the indigenous people, the Fremen on Dune. He brings this to them. He teaches them how to do it, and they all learn how to do it. He has the plans for the weirding modules, and the Fremen can manufacture these weirding modules, and they're taught by Paul how to use a weirding module, how to fight using the weirding way, and they would not be able to do that without Paul. Paul can fight better than they can, and he teaches them how to fight his way. And this is not something that's really expressed in the Villeneuve movie, and it's shown in, I guess, I didn't really watch the TV series or the TV miniseries, but I have seen scenes where they show Paul using the weirding way in the way that the miniseries does it. So a way of kind of skeeting away from the the Messiah thing that the book and this original movie or this original adaptation really gets into is basically to skeet away from the weirding way that this movie totally embraces. So the last favorite part that I want to get into is Paul captures the worm. Now, as you've heard me talk about earlier, these worms are gigantic. They're gigantic worms, and the Fremen ride these worms, and they kind of judge people based on that person's ability to ride a worm. First, they judge you for how big a worm that you can call, and then they judge you for how you get on top of that worm, and they judge you for how you basically drive the worm. The worms usually travel underground, but when they're called, the Fremen call the worms with what's called thumpers, and thumpers are since the worms will basically attack anything that's making a vibration on the surface. The thumpers are devices that create a rhythmic vibration that attracts the worms. And when the worm comes, they'll run alongside it and they'll attach hooks to it in such a way that causes the worm to rotate its body. And then once the Fremen get on top, they attach more hooks and whatnot, and then they basically start driving the worm. And they're driving the worm the same way somebody would drive a horse. And they want Paul to call one of these worms. This is like him being accepted into the Fremen society. This is like one of his final tests to see that if he can actually be a Fremen. And so, because they've really kind of brought him in as a person. And one of the differences between this movie and the new movies that just came out is that the new movie kind of takes place over a period of months, where this movie takes place over a couple of years, which I think it's more appropriate to look at it in that time frame. To, give Paul a chance to build up the Fremen. So, he runs alongside the worm. He attaches a special hook that kind of exposes like a delicate part of the worm to the sand. He kind of opens up like a tiny section of the worm, because the worm is gigantic. And so he uses the hook, opens up this tiny section to expose this wet, fleshy part. The worm gets irritated. It doesn't like it. So the worm rotates in order to get that sensitive section away from the sand, rotates from near the bottom of the sand to the top of the sand, where there's less chance for that sensitive exposed part to be exposed to the sand. And so as the worm is rotating, Paul is hanging on to this hook and allowing the worm to bring him to the top, because the worm doesn't really have a top or bottom, but it effectively now, Paul is on the top of the worm. so that the worm is less irritated. And then, it's funny, right? Because with all the exposition that this film does, it does not explain this. It actually succeeds in showing this just purely through context. Just, we're going to show you what Paul is doing, and then we're going to hope that you guess what's going on. And so Paul gets on the top of the worm, and then just like the music reaches a crescendo, his tribe is cheering for him. He did it. And then he starts, and then as he's driving the worms, the tribe comes up and they start throwing hooks on top of the worm. Or I think while Paul's on top, he stabs like sections of the worm with the rope going down, and then the Fremen run alongside. They grab these ropes and they start climbing the worm, and then he has the entire tribe on the worm's back, and he is triumphant. He has proven himself as a Fremen and a member of the tribe, and it's great. It's like one of the best parts of the movie. One of my favorite parts, obviously. So that's what I wanted to express. Those are my thoughts. Those are my favorite parts of Dune. I really enjoyed this rewatch. I really had a great. I remember when this movie first came out, and it's one of the things I had wanted to see, but it was, for some reason, just couldn't get to a movie theater, or couldn't convince somebody to take me to a movie theater to watch this movie, and I finally got to watch it on TV. And it's one of those things where I definitely did not understand it at first. I think I rented it on video, and it took several rentals for me to get this movie. It's one of those things where it's like, I like this movie, but I'm not getting it. I don't know if you've ever felt that way. It's like you like it, but you're not quite getting it. Like you feel like you're missing context or whatever. And that's what encouraged me to read the book. It's like, I've got to dig into this book to find out. And reading the book actually helped me to understand the movie, because the movie actually adheres to the book pretty closely. It's like it's really not trying to change what was in the book. There are several significant changes. Like, one of the changes is that at the end of the book, like, Paul has fallen in love with a Fremen woman. And they're together, but they're not like married or anything. And I'm not even sure if Fremen have marriage in their culture. But at the same, but even if they did, or if they didn't, even if they didn't, they know what a marriage is. And at the end of the book, Paul has basically captured the emperor, and he's taking control of the empire from the emperor. And he says, basically to seal this capture of the empire, he's going to take the emperor's daughter as his wife. And basically the emperor is not allowed to object to this marriage. But he still has Chani, right? He's in love with Chani, and the marriage to the princess is a marriage of convenience. And he has no plan on touching this woman, because Chani is his true love. But this is not something that they put in a movie, because I don't think the studio, or maybe it's either the studio or maybe Lynch himself didn't think that the audience would get it, didn't think that the audience would understand the concept of a concubine, even though they kind of showed a concubine in Paul's mother. They mentioned that Paul's mother was concubine, and his concubine was attached to his father. And there was even a point in the movie where his father is kind of lamenting never marrying Paul's mother. But Paul's situation is going to be different. He's going to have a concubine in Chani, and he's going to get married to Princess Irulan as a matter of convenience to solidify his control of the known universe. But that's not something that they have in the movie. So that's one of the things that's like really different from the books. I mean, there are lots of differences, but I think this is the most significant difference, because they could have very easily put this in the movie, but they didn't. And I think that they didn't put it in because they didn't know if this was going to send the right message to the audience. But you can kind of see it when people talk about this, the new Dune that came out, because in the new Dune, they do put this in the movie. And I don't know if audiences were confused, or if they because in the new movie, they really do make Paul out to be a bad guy. And that's on purpose. And it's on purpose because Frank Herbert intended for this to be the case, but that's not how he wrote, or this is what he claims. He claims that this was the case when he wrote Dune. But when you read Dune, you don't see this at all. In the first book, Dune, Paul is a total messiah, right? He's doing all the Messiah things that you would expect for a Messiah to do. And you don't really see any hint of him being evil or anything like that. But when when Villeneuve does his movie, he makes sure the audiences understand that Paul is eventually going to make a heel turn. So that's how that movie is made. So, as I said, those are my favorite parts. And let's go on to the next segment. The trivia top 10, where I scour IMDb and I choose 10 of my favorite points of trivia from the movie. So in the first one, Sir Patrick Stewart's casting as Gurney Halleck was actually a mistake. David Lynch thought he'd hire a different looking actor, as he'd only seen Stewart wearing a costume and heavy makeup that made him look older in the play. This is the look the director was expecting, and when Stewart showed up with his actual face, Lynch was disappointed at first. So I think Lynch had in mind an older person to play Gurney Halleck. And to be fair, Patrick Stewart has kind of looked old for a long time. Like, well, I don't want to say he looked old, but he looked older than he actually is. He presents as an older person because he went bald very early. I think he started going bald in his 20s. It's almost like genetics had said to Patrick that you don't deserve hair. It's like that. Hair is not for you. Hair is not the look that we're giving you. You will be bald now. So that's when, and so I guess Stewart was probably like in his 30s when he made this movie. And in his 30s, he was almost totally bald. So you go see Stewart in a play, it's not that difficult to make him look older. So up next, writer-director David Lynch said that he considers this movie the only real failure of his career. To this day, he refuses to talk about the production in great detail, and he refused numerous offers to work on a special edition DVD. Lynch has always claimed that revising the movie would be too painful an experience to endure. As of 2024, Lynch has clarified that a director's cut is impossible, as Dino De Laurentiis never allowed him to shoot scenes the way he wanted or to take liberties with the source material Lynch felt he needed. So it's kind of a shame. And I think that's the main reason that he doesn't like this movie, because I think that with all of the other movies that he's done, he's been able to have a greater deal of control. Because as I mentioned, he writes all of his movies and he expects a certain type of control. And he didn't have that with this movie. So I think that for him, this is a terrible experience. Despite being considered a financial flop, it is the David Lynch movie to make the most money in its initial box office run, and the only one to break into the top 5 in its opening weekend. It was number 2, and it was beaten by Beverly Hills Cop. Fayed Ruther was originally to have stepped out of the steam bath nude. Sting had agreed to shoot the scene nude, but the studio panicked and told the costume designers that they had to put something on him. The skimpy winged G-string he wore was made almost at the very last minute before the scene was set to film. The interesting thing about this is it's kind of a problem in the era of 1985. You had bad guys. It wasn't always enough to make them evil. So in this movie, the Harkonnens were evil, but it also had it also had a flavor of homoeroticism that was kind of layered on top of the Harkonnens. And this is kind of following through with what was written about them in the book, because there's, a lot of homophobia in our early history, especially in the history of cinema. And so they kind of baked that into this movie in how the Harkonnens were portrayed. So there's like Fade Rutha, played by Sting, coming out of the shower almost nude, and you have Vladimir Harkonnen like looking at him as though he wanted to engage in a physical interaction with his nephew, that sort of thing. Or and it's a lot surrounding the Vladimir Harkonnen, how he his mannerisms and how he looks at certain members of his people or whatever. So yeah, he is so that is part of the thing that kind of one of the elements of this movie. So the next one is, during the movie's original release, cheat sheets explaining much of the movie setting and its more obscure vocabulary were handed out to moviegoers at some theaters. So you went to see Dune, they would hand you like a pamphlet, so or a flyer, so that you would kind of understand the name, the people, the places, the things, because the studios were very concerned that people weren't going to get it, and that's an interesting choice that they made. Back in that time, they gave you a booklet, and this time with the release of Dune Part 2, they released a sexually suggestive popcorn bucket. So they haven't, promoting this movie has not gone well. Promoting the various versions of Dune has not gone great. They're still struggling with that. Up next, Patrick Stewart was at the time completely unfamiliar about who Sting was as a musician. When meeting him on set, he asked if he was a solo artist, to which Sting replied that he was in a band called The Police. Stewart, totally unaware, thought Sting played in a Police band. So that is kind of hilarious. Another Stewart trivia. Stewart said the still suit was the most uncomfortable costume he had ever worn. Max von Sydow said the same, but he also said he put up with it because he loved the way his body looked in them. So that's also kind of funny. What's also interesting is that the original Star Trek The Next Generation jumpsuits were also very uncomfortable for all of the actors, and not just Stewart. It actually gave them back problems. And I think they lasted for 2 seasons, and definitely in the 3rd season, they switched it up so that they were wearing like a top and a bottom instead of a jumpsuit, so that it was more comfortable for the actors. Francesca Annis, she played Lady Jessica. She commented that she had a negative impression when first watching the movie during the premiere, stating, "Any Hollywood film that has to explain itself in detail at the beginning is in trouble." Also, according to her, Dino De Laurentiis and David Lynch's different views, as well as De Laurentiis' creative interventions, contributed to the movie's poor performance. If David Lynch had been able to make his own film, it would have been brilliant, but unfortunately, Dino oversaw every single tiny thing. As you can see by the changes in my voice that I was trying to impersonate Francesca Annis, I admit I did it poorly, but I gave it the old college try. Up next, the expression Quitsat Haderach, said by Alia in the last line of the movie, literally means in Hebrew, jumping the path. This term is mentioned in the Talmud and Jewish folklore legends, referring to the miraculously traveling between 2 distant places in a brief time. Finally, the total number of production crew came to 1,700. This movie required 80 sets to build on 16 sound stages. More than 6 years in the making. It required writer and director David Lynch's work for 3.5 years. That is a lot of work and dedication. So that's it for the trivia. Let's move on to see what the critics thought. So the critics of Dune on Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 37%. The audience has it at 65%, mostly because of people like me. And then IMDb Reviews has it at 6.3 out of 10. So up first, Jack Garner from the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle wrote, ultimately, Dune is a most magnificent flying machine that can't quite get off the ground. But even if it could fly, it's certainly impressive to look at on the runway. And you know what? I have to agree. As a matter of fact, of all of that was actually a positive review. And all of the negative and positive review that I've chosen, I don't find fault with any of them. It's like, as far as I'm concerned, all of these critics are completely right. So up next is David Wilson from Tulsa World. He wrote, Dune does a good job of introducing us to another solar system, but it is full of such soap opera dialogue and pretentious seriousness that many won't find it worth the trip. And you know what? I gotta say he's right about that. There's no levity in this film. At least it's not a lot of levity. It's like you're not gonna watch this thinking nobody approaches something like Dune with Guardians of the Galaxy flavor. It's not gonna be that level of levity in this movie. Every person that has approached an adaptation of Dune has done it with the serious of a heart attack. Barbara Schulgasser from the San Francisco Examiner wrote, this is a religious movie. Dune fans are a reverential lot, and this is the celluloid house of worship for which they have waited. I think she's right about that. Yeah, this movie is something special to a certain part of the population. At last, we have Pauline Kael from The New Yorker who wrote, the movie is very heavy on exposition and the story isn't dramatized. It's merely acted out in a series of scenes that are like illustrations. And, you know, I don't think she's wrong. She's not exactly wrong about that. There's something truthful about this examination of the movie. I can't find fault with it. So we have come to the end of the episode. Dune is, as of this recording, available on streaming. That's it for today. Next week, we get weird. Joining me in this weirdness will be Rob Mabry, director of the film The Legend of El Chupacabra. And together, we reminisce about the John Hughes classic Weird Science. You can follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at Backlook Cinema. Don't forget that you can contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at fanmail@backlookcinema.com. Please leave a 5-star review on Apple or a star on Spotify, and that would be great. That would make me feel good. One last time, if you like this show, then please help us grow by spreading the word about Backlook Cinema, the podcast. I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe, share a movie from yesteryear with your family, hug your loved ones, and if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.